Sure, thank you. So first, I'd like to thank the Albert Schenker Institute for an AFT for inviting me here today for this very important conversation. And I also want to thank, because I know we're being streamed, I want to thank teachers. Just generally, I am a child who grew up in a house with a mother who was a third grade teacher. She had perfect penmanship, I must say. And she, from a very early age, started us off right with our vocabulary words. I remember sitting at the dinner table, and we had a table that was backed up to a wall, and I faced the wall, and every day there was a new word taped to the wall for me to learn. And I had to use that word in a sentence at dinner, breakfast the next morning, and the word would change, and that was the way that we were learning vocabulary as we ate. She actually went on to become the Title I coordinator for District 29 in Queens. She then became deputy superintendent.
That was your mother?
Yes, Jacqueline Brown. Jacqueline Brown, yes. A lot of people know her because she actually, although she has passed, she actually was one of the first African-American women to become a superintendent in New York City, and then ran the school improvement program for all of New York City.
Yes.
So to be having this conversation about the 50th anniversary of ESEA is near and dear to my heart, and may she rest in peace. Jackie Brown would be proud. So as we reflect on the 50th anniversary, it's important to remember the historical significance signed into law in 1965 by President Lyndon Johnson as part of his War on Poverty agenda. ESEA was designed to close the skill gap in reading, writing, and math between children from low-income households who attended urban or rural school systems and middle-class children who attended suburban school systems. President Johnson was convinced that ESEA would help to advance quality education as a lever out of poverty. In 2001, ESEA got off track. With promises of closing the achievement gap and ridding ourselves of the soft bigotry of low expectations, bipartisan support was garnered for No Child Left Behind. At the NAACP's convention in 2000, President Bush told the convention attendees that, quote, "A great movement of education reform has begun in this country, built on clear principles to raise the bar of standards, expect every child can learn, to give schools the flexibility to meet those standards, to measure progress and insist upon results, to blow the whistle on failure, provide parents with options to increase their option, like charters and choice, and also remember the role of education is to leave no child behind." He further stated, "Under my vision, all students must be measured. We must test to know. And low-performing schools, those schools that won't teach and won't change, will have 3 years to produce results, 3 years to meet standards, 3 years to make sure the very faces of our future are not mired in mediocrity. And if they're able to do so, the resources must go to parents so that if they're not able to do so, the resources must go to parents so parents can make a different choice." President Bush's vision was based on the Texas miracle. 15 years later, we know the miracle was a mirage, and that NCLB has hurt children of color and teachers while helping to speed the dismantlement of public education as a social good. The disaggregated data that we all wanted shows what we already knew. The achievement gap existed and unfortunately still exists. President Bush did foreshadow some of what we are now stuck with as a result of NCLB, tests, charters, and so-called choice. Since NCLB passed, local schools have been mired in tests. National mandates have led to states requiring batteries of tests in order to meet national standards. I should note that I am the vice chair of the board of Fair Test, for those who know that organization. The stakes have been raised for children and educators, and a survival of the fittest attitude has permeated school districts. Concerns over being labeled a failing school, takeover, turnaround, and closure have hurt the children who were supposed to be the beneficiaries of ESEA, low-income children. Standardized tests with high stakes have resulted in lost and narrowed learning time. In many schools, there's an obsession with passing tests. My daughter, who attends a public school in Maryland, takes tests to prepare for the tests. Teachers in her district are shuffled between grades specifically to raise test scores. For example, the best science teachers are moved to 8th grade in order to prepare students for 8th grade standardized tests. Schools have become test factories, spending precious learning time on test prep. In November 2012, the Chicago teacher Adam Hennon reported in the Washington Post spending 738 minutes or 12 hours and 18 minutes in just 3 weeks on preparing for and administering tests. In the 2013 report, Testing More, Teaching Less, What America's Obsession with Student Testing Costs in Money and Lost Instructional Time, AFT, highlights one district where students in grades 6 through 11 spent 100 hours or more a year or a month of learning time on test prep. In 2010, Advancement Project published a report called Test, Punish, and Push Out that made clear the connections between the focus on high-stakes testing in the aftermath of NCLB and the rise of zero-tolerance policies. In schools across the country, a focus on testing has pushed many children out of our classrooms. Children seen as disciplinary problems have become disposable in the name of achievement and accountability. Out-of-class time means less test prep time, which drives down test scores, which leads to student push-out to avoid a failing school label. The testing craze has fed an accountability system that seems to have taken a page out of our criminal justice system that punishes instead of rehabilitates. Because of a focus on standardized tests results as the measure of achievement and punishment instead of increasing investment and resources for success, communities of color are losing their schools. In Death by a Thousand Cuts, our partner, Journey for Justice Alliance, an alliance of grassroots organizing groups in 21 cities, lays out the way in which disinvestment and the current accountability system have led to school closures. The shuffling of children from school to school, the loss of community assets of schools, and the irony of it all, increased competition for public dollars between public schools and unaccountable, privately run charter schools. In Chicago, over a decade, 136 schools were closed, 50 of them in 2013-14. The Schott Foundation concluded 93% of those children impacted were from low-income families. Of the 23 schools closed in Philadelphia that year, 93% of students impacted were from low-income families. We know too often those children are shuffled to schools that are marginally, if at all, any better. This is why we filed a Title VI complaints on behalf of Journey for Justice and their local partners in Newark, New Jersey, New Orleans, Louisiana, and Chicago, Illinois. Unfortunately, ESEA has helped push an education reform agenda that works to the detriment of low-income children of color, making it harder to get quality education, the resources that are needed, and making the promise of ESEA more elusive as high-quality education becomes reserved for the privileged and the lucky lottery winners from low-income communities. The issue of inequality is most prevalent in the distribution of school funding. As the U.S. Department of Education acknowledged in its Dear Colleague letter on resource comparability last October, the allocation of school resources too often exacerbates rather than remedies achievement and opportunity gaps. What some schools consider to be basic aspects of quality education, like access to algebra, geometry, and advanced placement courses, those offerings are more of a rarity than the norm in schools with high populations of African American and Latino students. While recent discussions about ESEA have been focused on testing, too little attention has been given to the stimulation of more equitable inputs for schools serving low-income children and children of color. The reauthorization of ESEA must expand beyond assessments to include equitable school investments that ensure all students have access to key opportunities like small class sizes, art and music, imagine that, physical education classes, and well-supported and qualified teachers. With accompanying target supports that are responsive to students' unique needs, we can improve curriculum and teaching and end overly punitive and discriminatory discipline practices like suspensions, expulsions, and school-based arrests. There is a need for federal accountability, but we cannot continue to rely on a current system that punishes rather than supports, and does not take into account the resources, geography, student population, and needs of specific schools. NCLB never accomplished its intended goal of substantially expanding educational equity or significantly improving educational outcomes. In fact, racial achievement and opportunity gaps remain large, and many struggling school systems have made little progress. That's why last October we joined with 10 other civil rights organizations and released a set of recommendations that called for improved accountability system that promotes equity and strengthens rather than weakens schools so they can get better to serve the students of all needs. That letter is actually in your folder, dated October 28th. In addition to equitable resources, the recommendations included multiple measures because we know that there's more to a student than a standardized test score. Shared responsibility, which includes data collection and monitoring so every level of government, local, state, and federal, understands the role it must play in ensuring high-quality learning opportunities for every child. Professional competence, so educators are well prepared to meet the unique needs of the students. Informative assessments that are diverse enough to capture the unique learning skills of students and connected to a practical application outside of the classroom environment. Transparency, so all stakeholders, including students, parents, educators, and community members, have access to publicly available information. Meaningful family engagement that provides opportunities for communities to be involved in various aspects of the education system, including planning, decision-making, and implementation processes. Capacity building. So when we realize that schools are not performing at the level we want them to, we use that as a tool to strengthen supports rather than an opportunity to punish. Ultimately, when Congress reauthorizes ESEA, we hope we can get back to the basics, ensuring equity and resources for low-income children. The promise of Brown and LBJ's war on poverty will not be realized with our current model. Too many children are slipping through the cracks, many without high-quality educational opportunities, pushed out and hopeless. As young people around the country say they have had enough with devaluation of their lives and the lack of recognition of their humanity, as they have begun a movement called the Black Lives Matter movement, it is time that we commit to their success. It is time that we show them that they do matter. We can start with showing we value them by valuing their schools, their teachers, and their communities. We must invest in them. We can do better, and we must do better.
All right, Judith.